Hey everybody, welcome to the second lecture in week 3 of the course where we're looking at voting and the electoral system. This lecture is on parties and elections, and this is where we're going to look at the second major player in our electoral system. Last lecture we looked at voters and how voters make decisions. In future lectures we're going to look at how campaigns and candidates interact with the electoral system and try to win elections, and then we're going to look at how interest groups try to influence the outcome of elections and why and what they get from that. This lecture is specifically about parties. And of course we know that in the United States we have a two-party system, Democratic and Republican parties. The two parties are, they're very different in certain ways in terms of the policies that they advocate, the values that they express, the coalition of voters that are reliable for them. But in some ways they are identical. They're identical in the sense that they approach politics with the same general view and dynamics. And that's what I want to talk about today. I'll note some differences possibly between how Democrats and Republicans specifically do these things and some of the difficulties that each faces that are unique to their particular party because they do have different coalitions. But for the most part, I'll be speaking about general traits of the major political parties in the United States, the Democratic and the Republican parties. First of all, starred here, politics is a team sport. Everybody who succeeds in politics, and even many people who fail at politics, but definitely the people who succeed, understand that it's a team sport. And teams have superstars, and some of the members of the team are less paid attention to than others, right? Like, can anybody name the members of the New England Patriots offensive line? No, of course not. I mean, Patriots fans maybe, and probably not even all of them, but you know Tom Brady, you know Bill Belichick. Those are the superstars. And there are, of course, superstars and important players. Some players are more important in a party than others are, right? Obviously, if your party has the presidency, the president is the most important player on the team. But even the president can't get much done, or even anything at all, without support from the team. And the team doesn't always agree with itself, right? Politics is a team sport, but unlike a team where the purpose really is to pull together to win each game, politics is the team is a little more complicated because the goal in the game is much more complex. And really, even in a team, on a team sport, not all team members are necessarily aiming at the same goal of winning every particular game. Some superstars are trying to have the best contract. Some are trying to be famous personalities so they can get good endorsements. So even on a sports team, which is really much more narrowly focused on a specific goal than a political party is, there's diversity of what the team members are going for. In a political party, there's a lot of complexity. But if you're somebody who's involved in politics, whether you're an elected official, whether you're a strategist, whether you are a lobbyist, staff member, whatever role you play in politics, you know that the only way you get wins is as a team. You can get wins for yourself that maybe when your team isn't doing very well, but you're not going to get big wins for yourself. And the team is going to be an important part of you getting what you want. So people who go into politics and stay learn very quickly that politics is a team sport. Now, what do parties want? Parties want, as groups, what the individual members of them want. The individual members of parties want their policy solutions to be implemented. That's why people go into politics. Some people go into it for the power, some people go into it for the fame, some people go into it for the money they can make in the private sector afterwards. So there are multiple motivations for going into politics, but the primary motivation is to have your solutions to the problems that you see, have your policies that you think are the right ones for the country, for the world, for your city, for your state, for your community, to have those enacted because you believe that you have the right answers, or you believe that your values are the right values, or you believe that the problems that you see are the problems that everybody should see and we should be tackling those problems. That's why people go into politics. You don't typically go into politics for power, money, or fame. Like, you can get those things, but people go into it to advance their agendas, what they think is right. And parties exist as teams to sort of do the same thing, to advance the party platform. So, to advance your preferred policies, that's what parties exist for. That's why people go into politics in the first place. That's why they join parties. That's why they form parties. It's necessary to gain and keep control over the levers of government power. That's how you get your preferred policy outcomes. You don't win unless you're in charge. Parties are teams of people who try to do this collectively. That's, I don't think there's anything controversial in this boxed quote, and it's kind of a big long quote for board notes, but I just want you to focus on the fact that the main things that are going on is preferred policies, and what that is happening is control over the levers of government power. And how do you do it? You do it with a team. So that's how parties act. Parties obviously are part of the system of governance as well. And in this class, and particularly in week 3 of this class, we're only looking at the electoral system, not the system of governance. We're not looking at how parties govern, right? We're not looking at how they use those levers of government power. What we're just going to focus on in this class, and this is what the voting system is about, is gaining those levers. If you want to advance your preferred policies, you would rather win than lose. And so parties look at elections as a desire to win. Now, what do they want to win? Parties want to have legislative majorities, right? All policy starts in the legislature, whether it's Congress, the state legislature, the city council, the county commission. Policy is a legislative act. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution is about Congress, the legislative branch, because the legislature is the foundational political branch in a democratic system. It makes all the policies. The executive enforces and has all kinds of important powers, but there's nothing to enforce or enact or implement, and there's no money to spend until the legislature acts. So parties want a legislative majority. Now, why do they want a legislative majority? There's kind of this is definitely a duh, right? Like, you want to be in the majority, right? Democracy, as I've said a couple times already in this class, is not just majority rules, but one of the principles of democratic politics is that majorities rule. There's more to democracy than majority rules, but it's definitely an important mechanism. If you want to get your preferred policies enacted, you'd rather have a majority than a minority, right? A minority can play defense. A minority can stop the majority from getting as much of what it wants done, but minorities are playing defense. To play offense, to get what you want, and that might be a tax increase, that might be a tax cut, that might be police reform, that might be stopping police reform, that might be an expansion of healthcare, or it might be a contraction of government healthcare. Whatever it is you want, you being in the majority is going to make it more likely that you're going to get it. Now, it's no guarantee, for sure. Now, this class is not about legislative politics, so I won't talk about why it is that there's no guarantee. But obviously, you're in the driver's seat if you have the majority. So that's what you want. They also want to win executive positions because, of course, the executives, they can issue executive orders, they can veto things, they have control over implementation, and there's a lot of discretion. Executives make appointments that are both judicial appointments and executive appointments that are really important to these victories. So you obviously want these two, right? And in fact, this is, I put it second because foundationally the legislature is who makes policy. These are easier victories. You win. There's one executive position. You win the presidency, you've got a ton, right? To get a legislative majority means you have to get in the House of Representatives 218 seats. In the Senate, you have to get 51 seats. And so there's more to do. This is a more unified, centralized task. And importantly, and obviously these first two are kind of duh. You want a majority, you want executive positions. An important part of what parties want in order to get their preferred policies is to have a unified caucus. A party, like a team, is a diverse set of people who have similar, converging, often very closely aligned interests and ideas and solutions, but they're not homogenous, right? Democrats are not all the same. Republicans are not all the same. And in fact, because our two major parties, in order to win legislative majorities, you have to win a lot of seats, and you have to win the most votes in a lot of different districts and states. In order to do that, you have to have a pretty broad coalition. You can't just appeal to one group of people. You have to appeal to at least 3 or 4 different groups of people. And in doing so, you're creating diversity, you're creating fragmentation, you're creating internal conflict. For a party to win, it needs a coalition. it needs a group of different supporters that come from different perspectives. Then, once you win with that coalition, you want the members of your coalition, the people who were voted in by the environmental supporters, the people who were voted in by the labor supporters, the people who were voted in by the socialist supporters, the people who were voted in by the social moderates. You need all those people now to push in the same direction, to adopt the goals of the team. So you want a unified caucus. And the word caucus has multiple meanings. In this particular instance, a caucus is the group of people who are office holders in your party. So the Republican caucus in Congress is all the Republican members of the U.S. Congress. The Republican caucus in the Oregon State Legislature are all the Republican members of the Oregon State Legislature. Same thing for the Democratic caucus. How do you maintain a unified caucus? This is actually the hardest part. Like, how do you have a legislative majority? You win elections. How do you win elections? Well, that's one, I'm going to talk about that in the next class, campaign politics. But two, like, you win elections by appealing to the most voters, by building this coalition. The winning of elections creates a problem. The doing of the necessity here creates a problem for this, because you build a broad coalition. Now, one of the things that is interesting about our two major parties is that the two major parties have shifting coalitions, and part of competing in this team sport is trying to expand your coalition. The more you expand your coalition, the more you win, though of course the more you have a unity problem, but the more you win, and that's the primary goal of parties, is to win. You can't win, you can't get your preferred policy outcomes unless you control the levers of power, and that means winning elections, and winning them again and again. As the parties have sought to widen their coalitions, they've sometimes broken off pieces from the other party's coalition and taken it for their own, but in doing so, they often had to sacrifice part of their own coalition to the other party. The South is often referred to in politics as the solid South. Like, the southern states tend to vote, one way or the other. Like, southern states are red states. Well, southern states were the solid South for the Democratic Party for decades. They've been solid for the Republican Party for decades. Part of the reason why they were solid for the Democratic Party and then that switch is because the Democratic Party nationally made some choices that aligned them with the civil rights movement, and Southern Democrats had a problem with that, and the Republican Party adopted what is famously called the Southern strategy, which was to show Southern whites that the Republican Party was their natural home, not the Democratic Party. So they brought them over. Parties are always competing to tear off pieces of the other party's coalition, because when you do so, you win. One of the things that Trump was able to do was to take some of the blue-collar white support that the Democratic Party and the Rust Belt particularly had relied on for decades as workers whose lives benefited from the kinds of policies that Democrats pushed for, and he pulled that over into the Republican Party, or at least into his own camp, his own version of the Republican Party. And that actually has made the Republican Party less unified, right? Trump won the presidency by grabbing a block of important voters that the Democrats had largely had their loyalty for decades, and that was great to win, but then it also complicated the Republican Party's task of governing, because it made it harder to maintain a unified caucus, because the desires of that group that Trump brought over conflict with the desires of other coalition members. And that's true even under the best of times for a party, that there are going to be elements of the coalition that disagree with each other, right? The Christian conservatives and the business fiscal conservatives in the Republican Party, they see eye to eye on a number of issues, but they have differences on a number of issues, particularly because business conservatives are often socially at least moderate, if not outright socially liberal, and Christian conservatives, while they do tend to support capitalism, they're not necessarily fully gung-ho for total laissez-faire capitalism. So there's tension there. That's true. The Democratic Party has a much more diverse coalition, and tensions are more common in the Democratic Party than they have been in the Republican Party. But parties go in and out of having a unified caucus, or having a more or less unified caucus. And then there are changes in the coalition. How do you create and maintain unity when what you have to do is have a coalition that's going to have multiple members and people with different perspectives, people with different goals? How do you maintain unity? Well, unity is party discipline. And what generates party discipline is a set of strategies that make use of resources that parties have. Primaries are one way of creating party discipline. A primary is the party's election for its candidate in the general election. And in a primary, the voters in a party get together and decide among their party's candidates who they're going to put on the ballot. And I'll talk about safe and swing states in the final lecture for week 3, but I'll just note that in a safe Republican or Democratic district, the primary election is basically the election. If the Democratic primary here in Portland is the election for our member of the House of Representatives, because a Republican's not going to win this seat unless the Democrat is a complete idiot, and even then, probably not. So the primary election is often the election in safe seats. In swing seats, it's the first of 2 important elections. And primaries are one way to maintain party discipline because this is where party leaders can either support incumbents from their party or support challengers. So let's say that I'm a Republican who's in a safe Republican seat, but I'm displeasing to the Republican leadership. What that means is they're going to say, hey, look, we want a unified caucus, and you're trouble for us. You don't vote for our bills. You don't support our policies in negotiations. You're more likely to want to compromise. This is not helping us. And so you're in a safe seat, but it's only safe for us as a team. It's a Republican safe seat. It's not your safe seat. It's our safe seat. So if you want to stay in that seat, you better play ball with us, or we will find somebody who will primary you. Now, one of the things that actually has been problematic for political parties is that primarying has become a tool of outside groups as well. It used to be that primary challenges that were legitimate, like ones that had a chance of winning, unseating an incumbent, would come from within the party itself. That has changed. Citizens United ruling, which allows a bunch of outside money and allows insurgent candidates to have a giant megaphone in a way that they didn't in the past, has created the possibility for people who like the policies of one party or the other, but think they're being too soft or too moderate, to primary incumbents themselves from the outside. Primarying used to be kind of a tool of party leadership. Now it's become a tool for dissidents and outsiders. The Tea Party was not a wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party. The Tea Party in 2010 was dissatisfied with Republican incumbents who were too moderate from their point of view. And so they launched a bunch of primary challenges that unseated what they called rhinos, Republicans in name only, but were moderate and often pragmatic Republicans, and replaced them with more ideological, more conservative Republicans. That actually had the problematic outcome of creating a disunified caucus. And both parties have suffered from sort of these dissident outside groups winning primaries and then occupying safe seats with a person who isn't a party player. That has put tensions on both the Democratic and the Republican Party's caucuses and their leadership. The Republican Party in recent years has had a bigger problem with it than the Democratic Party. But that's mostly because the Republicans have been in majorities for a lot of that time, and so it's a bigger problem for the majority party. The minority party has less of a problem keeping its unified caucus in opposition. It's easier to unify people in opposition, especially when you're in the minority, than it is to unify people in the direction of something. So primaries are a way to maintain party discipline, but problematically for party leaders and for party unity, the primary has become a tool that actually works in the opposite direction as well. And so primaries now create opportunities for party leaders to control their members, but also it's created headaches for them because they end up getting people come from the outside and unseat party members, incumbents who've been playing ball. Another way that party leaders maintain discipline is with campaign support. This is a classic carrot and stick. And campaign support is largely financial, but it's also structural, right? It's the ground game. It's know-how. It's polling. It's good party strategists. It's people and their energy that are necessary to supplement money. But one of the biggest ways that party leaders maintain party unity is by giving the financial support to incumbents, particularly in swing districts, that they need to keep winning elections. And as an incumbent in a swing district, that to get the money from the party leadership that you need, they'll give you some. You're always going to get some. If you're a Democrat, you're going to get money from the Democratic Party. If you're a Republican, you're going to get money from the Republican Party. But will you get as much as you want? Will you get as much as you need? That's when the leadership is going to look at you going, well, how much have you played ball? How reliable are you? How much have you contributed to our unity? Or how much have you contributed to our disunity? And there's going to be an indexing of that level of loyalty to the amount of campaign support you can get. I've mentioned leadership, and the final bullet point in this one is leadership pathway. I talk about parties as a team, but party leaders are obviously more important than rank and file members. Party leaders are the ones who decide which of the preferred policies they're going to act on now. They're the ones who set the agenda once you have majorities in an executive position. They're the ones who say, hey, we're going for this. Because you can't, both parties have platforms that are giant. They cover every issue that you could possibly cover, but you can only get to a small handful in any 2-year cycle of major policies. So the leadership are the ones who decide which things are going to go to the top of the agenda. So if you go into politics to make a difference in the world, you have your ideas, you join a team, your team is winning, you still need to rise to a leadership position to have a big impact, to have a more measurable impact. Leadership positions are committee chair positions. They are things like the whip or the majority leader or speaker of the House or Senate majority leader, deputy whip. There's a leadership team that's essentially a team within the team. And when you get on the leadership team, you have a bigger impact over what the party is going to go for, which of its vast array of preferred policies are going to be enacted on. And if the policies you prefer are way down the list and you linger in the rank and file part of your party and never get to leadership, that issue's not going to get to the top of the list unless someone else gets it there. So party leaders are the ones who are in control of the game plan of the team, right? They're the coach, the quarterback. They're the brain trust of the party. They're the ones who decide not just how to pursue the strategy, but what is at the top of the agenda. Obviously, from the point of view of somebody who spends their life in politics and they got into politics to make a difference in the world and get their policies enacted, you want to be on the leadership team. And so part of what maintains party discipline is the leadership pathway, right? And the more you're able to show your loyalty, the more that the people who are leaders are going to advance you into new positions, right? You don't get a committee chairpersonship in the U.S. Congress unless you're a very loyal member of the party. If you get a chair position and you begin to show disloyalty and you start voting against what the party leadership wants, you're going to lose that chair position relatively quickly. So there's that. There's also providing support to other members of your party. All politicians are engaged in fundraising, and some are better than others. Some are so good that they can raise money not only for their own re-election campaigns, but they can raise money that they can give to other candidates. Elected officials often form, at least ones with leadership potential, form what are called leadership PACs. And this is a political action committee that raises a bunch of money, and then that money is donated to other candidates inside that particular party. And leadership PACs are one way of generating support from your colleagues, right? Because your colleagues are like, oh, hey, your leadership PAC donated money to my campaign. I'm so happy to not have to go out and raise that money myself. I'm with you. You're my leadership material. Also, leadership PACs can potentially primary people and say, hey, I'm going to give money to people who are going to be more loyal to me than they are doing their own thing. And so leadership PACs, people who raise money, are able to, for their colleagues as well as for potential primary challengers, are able to rise into leadership positions. Both Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, they're all fundraising machines. They're people who are not only able to raise money for their own re-election campaigns, but for the party itself, for their own leadership PACs, and they're able to distribute money and they win loyalty that way. Fundraising wins loyalty in politics. Loyalty wins loyalty in politics too. Ideological alignment wins loyalty. Personal relationships. There are a lot of ways that you win loyalty in politics, but for sure, financial support. So the leadership pathway comes through helping your fellow party members. And one of the ways that you get moved up is by being loyal to the current party leadership. That's one of the ways in which party unity is maintained. Now, there's more to be said that's at a finer, granular level about how party leaders and rank and file members behave in relation to each other. But that's for a different class. I'm teaching a class in the fall called Parties and Elections. And in that particular class, Poli-Sci 416, I think it is, and that will be a remote instruction class this fall. I'll delve much more deeply in that particular class into these mechanisms as well as the other mechanisms that are used by party leaders in order to advance their agendas, generate party unity, continue winning and maintaining their majorities rather than losing their majorities. But for the purposes of this class, just know that the way that parties interact with the electoral system, the way that they appeal to voters, the way that they try to get their goal is by playing as a team sport, winning these important positions by appealing to as many voters as possible, and then once they've won, trying to maintain unity so they can actually then take their victories and turn those electoral victories into policy victories.